Good evening and welcome to Chester County's final virtual town tours and village walk for 2020. I want to thank everyone who has been with us for the whole series and greet our new viewers this evening. My name is Karen Marshall and I've had such a good time presenting the virtual series this summer on behalf of the Chester County Planning Commission, the Chester County Historic Preservation Network, and our 6 amazing historic sites who created each tour. I want to thank the town tour team, Nancy Shields, Catherine Marshall, and Kathleen Hood for all their work this summer. Nancy, can you join me to say goodbye?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this summer as we were able to continue to provide the Town Tours and Village Walks program virtually. I'd like to also say a special thank you to Karen Marshall and Kathleen Hood for working with the historical commissions and organizations to make this summer series possible. And another special thank you to both Catherine Marshall for providing her abundant Zoom knowledge and to many of my coworkers who helped us make this all look so seamless and professional. I'm looking forward to next summer's program, hoping I can see all of you in person. Enjoy tonight's special preview of Kennett's Occupation Day and the Battle of the Brandywine.
Thanks so much, Nancy. I've already begun planning next summer with our local historical commissions and organizations, and we have some very exciting programs lined up. We will be exploring the John Evans founding colonial residence and mill complex in London Britton Township, celebrating the Schuylkill River Trail and the Fricks Lock Village Trailhead opening in East Coventry Township. We will be visiting the Radnor Hunt in Willistown Township and learning about the Free Love Valley in North Coventry Township. Keep an eye on the Town Tours website for all the updates. As I always enjoy saying, Chester County is a very special place. Founded in 1682 by William Penn, it has a long and rich heritage that literally embodies the span of this country's development and history. Our well-preserved cultural landscape has many stories to tell. We will close our series with the most destructive moment in our history, the Battle of Brandywine on September 11, 1777, and its impact on what is today the borough of Kennett Square, in particular the night before the battle. The map you see depicts the 35,000 acres of the battlefield, which extends over 2 counties and 15 municipalities in both Chester County and Delaware County. The black dots depict the primary troop movements. And now, here's our host, Kathleen Hood, to introduce you to our final tour of the summer.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Karen. Tonight's program, Kennett Square Occupation Day, which is being recorded, is the last in our 6-part virtual town tours and village walks series. This evening, our grand finale includes a 2-part video-based presentation. Part 1 will feature Kennett Square Occupation Day and its annual celebration. Part 2 will focus on what happened the day after the occupation of Kennett Square, the Battle of the Brandywine. Following each part, 1 and 2, we encourage you to stay on for a Q&A session with our panelists, and we will finish with a very special closing. Questions may be submitted throughout the webinar by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and typing in your question. We will answer as many questions as time permits. In tonight's program, be prepared to meet people from the past as we explore how the Revolutionary War impacted Chester County in 2 areas along what is now PA Route 1. Enjoy our program as you're transported back through time to glimpse events in Chester County in the 1700s. Time travelers ready? Here we go. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our lead Kennett Square panelist, Lynn Sinclair, who in a future life became the founder and CEO of the Kennett Heritage Center. Please welcome Lynn Sinclair.
Thank you, Kathleen. Some of you may remember attending Kennett Square's town tour in 2017, when we staged a walking play based on Kevin Sheridan's time travel book, The Battle of Brandywine Creek. The tour was titled 2 Days Before Brandywine, and in it, actors related stories from both the occupiers and the occupied of Kennett Square in 1777. Last year, we revisited the theme and organized our first Kennett Occupation Day to commemorate an overlooked yet monumental event in Kennett history. This year, we rose to the challenge to create a video town tour. Tonight, we present for you the virtual time travel tour and invitation to Kennett Occupation Day. Most of you know that the Battle of Brandywine, which took place on September 11, 1777, was the longest single day of fighting in the American Revolutionary War. General Washington and the Continental Army were defeated by the shrewd battle plans made by the British generals. Until recently, little consideration was given to the impact on the inhabitants of Kennett the day before the battle. Tonight, we're going to take you on an imaginary journey back to that day, the day we call Kennett Occupation Day. Try to imagine. It's a sweltering evening on September 9th, 1777. You've been toiling all day in the late summer heat and humidity. And after a day of harvesting, you head to the village with a load of hay for Peter Bell, the tavern keeper of the Unicorn Inn. His is a busy establishment as it sits on the great road from Chester to Nottingham. Several farmers have gathered at the Unicorn for refreshment. It was a good season and some boast about their bounty. Others complain about the weather. But all are thinking about the war. Being Quakers, they wish to remain neutral, but they are worried. A frenzied rider approaches the inn and leaps off his horse. He tells the farmers assembled there that the king's army is approaching from the west. There are thousands of soldiers with wagons and cannons. The crowd disperses. They race home to batten down the hatches or flee to relatives' homes elsewhere. By the middle of the next day, not a townsman is to be seen, as the village teems with 18,000 hungry, exhausted British soldiers, camp followers, and their horses. They form two encampments, one along present-day Route 82 and the other along McFarland Road. The soldiers pillaged and looted on their 16-day march from the Elk River to Kennett, and today is no different. They scavenge food and drink and hay for their horses. A slaughter pen is set up to deal with the hogs and cattle. The camp followers shuck corn and prepare cook fires. The air is thick, hot, and heavy with smoke and humidity. Generals Cornwallis and Howe make their headquarters at the lone brick building on the south side of the Great Road. The house is owned by Colonel Joseph Shippen, who may have fled to Philadelphia. Kniphausen takes the Unicorn Inn as his headquarters. It's the only other substantial building in the village. The officers help themselves to Peter Bell's inventory of rum and cider, and all the other provisions of the inn. Early the next morning, Kniphausen's column will march east to meet Washington in a feint attack. Later, Cornwallis will march north to outflank Washington's right. The battle was a major British victory, but the American forces managed to withdraw in an unexpectedly good order. As for the impact on the people of Kennett, for some, the devastation was substantial. It took some families 10 years to recover, and some never did. On September 10th, we will be commemorating Kennett Occupation Day. This open-air event will begin at 4 p.m. on East State Street in Kennett Square. We invite you to don your tricorn hat, come out, and take a stand. March with the fife and drum team, or commiserate with local Quakers. Find out what happened to Peter Bell. Let Patrick Ferguson tell you about his breech-loading rifle. Loyalist Timothy Osborne will tell you how he feels about those who oppose the king. The generals will share their battle plans as they prepare to meet General Washington and the Continental Army at Brandywine Creek. General Cornwallis will address the crowd at 6 p.m. We'll have Hessian helmets and British flags for the kids, and there will be dining in the street, and your tri-corner hat or mob cap will get you discounts at participating restaurants. So come help us commemorate this historic event. To learn more, visit our website, KennettOccupationDay.com. Social distancing and masks will be required. There's plenty of free parking in the municipal garage off of East Linden Street. So I hope you had as much fun watching it as I had making this film. Joining us tonight are my fellow historians and reenactors, Ken Lawson and Randall Spackman. Randall is president and Ken is vice president of Chadsford Historical Society. And Randall owns the 1709 Thornbury Farm on Brandywine Battlefield.
We're going to begin our Q&A session right now. And the very first question is, the video talked about the great road from Chester to Nottingham. Exactly what present day road is that?
I'll answer that. Starting at Chester and heading west, that would be Route 1, coming into Kennett, State Street, and heading out of Kennett, Baltimore Pike.
Great. Thanks so much, Lynn. And the Battle of the Brandywine is supposed to have been the longest single day of fighting. And the question that is being posed is, why haven't we heard so much about this particular battle?
Yeah, I'll answer that question. There's two main reasons, and I'm sure Andrew will cover this in more detail in the part two. But it was a loss for George Washington and the Continental troops in a battle that he very much thought could have decided the outcome of the war. And he was flanked. In other words, the British snuck up behind him in the same manner that they did the year before at the Battle of Long Island. So it was an embarrassing loss, and General Washington didn't talk much about this battle after the fact. It has also occurred in the Quaker territory. And as we know, while General Nathaniel Greene was a Quaker, and the Quakers have preserved the Quaker meeting houses invaluable history, you know, there's a reluctance to celebrate or acknowledge wartime activities and preserve battlefields. So the message, you know, has been somewhat, you know, subdued by those two things.
Great, thank you so much. Another reference was to camp followers. Exactly what does that term mean?
I can help with that. Camp followers are the support structure behind the army. They're the wives, the children, the blacksmiths, the cooks, everything that makes an army run. And the English traveled very heavy. They probably had several thousand camp followers following them everywhere they went. So it was a very, very big brigade, because obviously they had to feed, clothe, repair, and maintain all these horses and oxen, all that also helped pull the army's cannons.
Our fourth question, thanks so much, has to do with the British soldiers and where they might have stayed or encamped when they were in the Kennett Village area.
I think a couple of us can fill in on that one. I can speak as a reenactor and as a British soldier myself. I'm in a British 43rd uniform right now. They would have been preparing for battle the next day. They've been trying to rest. They've been right around close and working on battle plans, getting the fifers and the drums already. And of course, getting their muskets or the brown vests all ready to fire, because obviously you had to be prepared. And for a day like that, they knew Washington was a very good foe.
And in our last question, it relates to what kind of devastation was actually seen in the Kennett Square area.
We have a short video to answer that question.
I must note here in Pennsylvania that the inhabitants are encountered everywhere. This province is more loyal to the king than all the others. Therefore, nothing is taken from the inhabitants.
Dear son, you're anxious to know how the times are affected. I think I have not heard of any of them wishing for the British Tartars since they left us, which was September 11th. They came here September the 9th. They ravaged the place as completely as a horde of savages would have done.
Two competing versions of the same event. Who do we choose to believe? Or is one necessarily wrong for the other to be right? What if we could know the identity of each landowner as the British or American troops marched across their properties? What if we had the ability to determine if the landowner was a Quaker, Mennonite, or Presbyterian, or a slave owner, tavern keeper, blacksmith, or mill owner? To see at a bird's eye view which properties were plundered by the British, the Hessians, or the American forces, and which properties were left untouched. Now we can. As the British and Hessian troops advanced into Chester County, they encountered a notable thing: people. Before the British landed at the head of Elk, word had spread like wildfire throughout the area. With advance warning, many residents took the opportunity to flee. In Cecil County, Maryland, an area dominated by the Scots-Irish, who, of all groups, understood what was coming, the British Army encountered deserted farms. Once in Delaware, much of the Welsh Baptist inhabitants had also left, among them the family of John Evans, Esquire, who was serving as a Pennsylvania State Supreme Court Justice, recently appointed in August 1777. He sent his family from the Newark area to his estate in London Britton Township. If the British Army had headed due north from the head of Elk, they would have received a different reception in an area largely settled by the Scots-Irish. Instead, their path led them into a heavily Quaker area. This was why they encountered people. When Catherine Baird referred to them not wishing for the British Tartars, she was likely alluding to her Quaker neighbors in Kennett Township. Refusing to support the war effort by participating in local government or paying taxes, Quakers were left open to retribution. With little protections offered them under the new government, militia units, tax collectors, and American sympathizers constantly harassed Quaker residents, taking their cattle, goods, and money to compensate for their lack of support for the American cause. Records of Quaker sufferings at the hands of their neighbors recount these abuses. Understood in this context, is it any wonder that they initially looked upon the British forces as a restoration of order and protection they had gone without? The Quakers were not the only group who may have had a more favorable opinion of the British. For the enslaved population of the county, the British represented freedom, which continued to be denied them under the new American government. It is estimated that over 20,000 freedom-seeking enslaved African Americans served in the British Army. Among them were Jim, Isaac, and George, who ran towards the British in September 1777 and away from their enslavement in Oxford Township. The damage done initially by British troops varied from location to location. As the troops under General Kennett went northwest down the Newport Road, they left the area along the Newport and Nottingham roads relatively unscathed. Perhaps this is where the Hessian Jägers' perception that they did not have to plunder was formed. The story, however, was different as the British entered southwestern Kennett Township. The damage to this township was extensive and long-lasting. Catherine Baird, writing to her son, Dr. Absalom Baird, a doctor in the Continental Army, recounts the destruction of the village of Kennett Square in detail.
They took from my landlord, James Walter, 6 horses, 16 head of cattle, and 20 sheep, being his whole stock. plundered his barn of wheat, rye oats, and hay, and his house of between 300 and 400 weight of cheese and all the provisions we had. They took your fine linen shirts, your breeches, and regimental coat. William Hutchison was in danger of his life by this last. It was at his house, and they tried but could not get it on him, so he was saved, but they took the coat. They used the rest of the neighborhood no better, and some much worse. Some they stripped, they entirely destroyed all that James Ellis had, and Joseph Walter. They stripped him his wife and the lame girl, cut the drawers and desk open with their hatchets, and left it like a waste. I earnestly desire you to take care of yourself, lest you fall into their hands, for they are a cruel and bloodthirsty crew. I wish I may never see any of them again.
Charles and his wife Sarah Hall purchased 20 acres on the outskirts of Kennett Square in 1759. Described by his wife as an industrious, frugal man, Charles lost 70 pounds worth of property by the ravages of the British Army, a sum that was devastating for a small farmer to recover from. After Charles and 3 of her children died of a malignant fever, Sarah requested aid from the Quaker Meeting for Suffering in Philadelphia. Sarah, like her neighbor Catherine, was not spared the devastation, even though, as a Quaker, she may have looked upon the arrival of the British forces with hope. Unlike Catherine, a Scots-Irish Presbyterian who, with little doubt, already despised them. The devastation would continue down the Nottingham Road as the British advanced towards Chadds Ford.
And so we have the British soldiers marching toward Chadds Ford. In part 2, colonial soldier Andrew Oughton will continue the story. It is interesting to note that in a future life, this soldier became Director of Education and Museum Services at Brandywine Battlefield. Please welcome Andrew Oughton.
Thank you, Kathleen. It is now September 11, 1777. As General Howe and his Crown forces established a battle plan in Kennett Square, General George Washington was on the eastern side of the Brandywine River establishing his defense of Chadds Ford, where the Great Nottingham Road crossed the river. He arrived in the area on September 9, 1777, and on that night, along with September 10, 1777, he held 2 councils of war at the home of Benjamin Ring, roughly a mile from the Brandywine. This is now the location of Brandywine Battlefield Park. Anticipating the Crown forces to march on Philadelphia via the Great Nottingham Road, or modern-day Route 1, he positioned his main defense at Chadds Ford. He also established defensive positions at fords or crossing points along the Brandywine located to the north and south of that location. Unfortunately, due to poor knowledge of the terrain, he failed to defend 2 northern fords roughly 8 miles north of Chadds Ford. This gave the British an open avenue to conduct a pincer movement and outflank Washington's forces. What ensued on September 11, 1777 was the largest single-day land battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Brandywine. The following film will go into greater depth regarding this important engagement.
The conflict with Britain had been expanding for 2 years when war suddenly came to the banks of the Brandywine River in 1777. Seizing Philadelphia, the capital of the newly formed nation, and the birthplace of the Declaration of Independence, was the goal of the main British Army under General Sir William Howe. Howe believed that capturing the city would not only demoralize the Patriot cause, but split the colonies and secure for the Crown a region rich in food and manufactured goods. Alexander Hamilton, an aide to America's General George Washington, was well aware of what the loss of Philadelphia would mean to the American cause.
Philadelphia has long been the main source of supplies toward the war, and getting it into their possession would deprive us of a wheel we could very badly spare in the great political and military machine.
General Howe's battle plan to capture Philadelphia called for a surprise attack on the colonial capital from the southwest. This led to his confrontation with American soldiers in the Brandywine Valley. His powerful army numbered 5,000 German Hessians and 13,000 British troops. For General Washington, the eastern heights rising sharply above the Brandywine River offered his troops an excellent defensive position, a natural moat with advantageous high ground behind. There, the Patriots assembled their largest fighting force to date, almost 15,000 men, including many untested in 18th century warfare. Foreign officers served among the Continentals. Foremost among those, a 19-year-old wealthy French volunteer with a zest for liberty, the Marquis de Lafayette. His and his country's contribution would prove critical to the American cause.
I leave that to the fates of tomorrow. Indeed, sir.
On the morning of September 9th, Washington summoned his generals to his headquarters at the Ring House to plan the deployment of their troops. He positioned the American army on the heights east of the Brandywine River, guarding the main fords, shallow places where the enemy could cross the river. Troops stood watch for 2 days, from Buffington's Ford to the north, to Pyle's Ford to the south. Washington expected to clash with the British at Chad's Ford, where the main road between Philadelphia and Baltimore crossed the Brandywine, and it was here he posted the main strength of his army. He was confident the area was secure, a decision he would soon regret. Meanwhile, the British gathered at Kennett Square to formulate their strategy.
We have the rebels under control, the rabble that they are.
General Howe planned a pincers movement, which had worked against the Americans before. One column of 7,000 soldiers would march directly on Chad's Ford to attack Washington's main forces and pin them in place. The rest of the British Army would move in a wide flanking movement north, moving quietly 17 miles to cross the Brandywine above the fords Washington guarded, and launch a surprise attack on the right flank of the Continental Army. On September 11, 1777, the harvest-ready farms of Brandywine were about to become fields of death. A heavy, dense fog provided cover for the approaching British troops. When the fog lifted, the sun blazed and temperatures soared. Humidity, heat haze, and dust blanketed the area, adding to the misery of soldiers on both sides. During the early morning hours, General Howe ordered Hessian General Wilhelm von Kniphausen to launch an all-out attack down the main road toward Washington's positions at Chad's Ford. Kniphausen's troops included a company armed with the new rapid-firing breech-loading rifles invented by their commander, Major Patrick Ferguson. Meanwhile, Howe led General Charles Cornwallis and his main force upstream to cross at the unguarded fords above the forks of the Brandywine. Vicious fighting raged throughout the day as both sides stood shoulder to shoulder, facing each other, 80 to 150 yards apart, trading 3 shots a minute, then charging with fixed bayonets. Conflicting and confusing information plagued General Washington throughout the day. Reports from the front lines first suggested that General Howe had split his forces. Later messages both confirmed and denied these reports. But Washington persisted with his battle plan, convinced that the British were launching their entire force against his line at Chad's Ford. Meanwhile, Howe and the majority of his troops continued their march north, crossing the river at an unprotected ford and outflanking the Americans before they had a chance to position and defend themselves. By mid-afternoon, they secured a commanding position near the Birmingham Friends meeting house.
Prepare to charge!
As the British came eye to eye with the American soldiers in the right flank,
Bayonet! Huzzah!
Washington realized he had been outmaneuvered by General Howe. In a desperate attempt to turn the battle, he commanded his army to take the high ground around the Birmingham Friends Meeting House. But the British already held that position. After a long, blistering day of bloodshed, the reality of defeat began to pierce American dreams of victory.
It's for your own good, lad. It's for your own good, lad. Steady, it's for the cause, lad. It's for the cause.
American casualties were staggering. Nearly 1,200 killed and wounded Patriot soldiers scattered the battlefield where they fell. Over 300 Americans were taken prisoner. The British officially listed 600 men killed or wounded, but later reports suggested heavy losses closer to 2,000, 15% of their total army. France's Marquis de Lafayette fought courageously, rallying American troops even while he was wounded. His gallant conduct made him a hero to soldiers and a favorite with Washington. As dusk fell on the Brandywine Valley, the guns fell silent. Polish Count Casimir Pulaski organized a cavalry screen to protect the beleaguered American troops as they retreated to the city of Chester, some 12 miles to the east. General Howe and his exhausted troops camped on the battlefield. They had a meager victory feast of cold pork and grog, then spent the next few days caring for the wounded, burying the dead, and resupplying. British Captain John Andre wrote in his journal,
Night and the fatigue the soldiers had undergone prevented any pursuit.
The defeat at Brandywine did not demoralize the colonial soldiers. They believed the loss wasn't because of their fighting abilities, but rather poor knowledge of the terrain and bad intelligence. Taking pen in hand, General Washington wrote to Congress,
Notwithstanding the misfortune of the day, I am happy to find the troops in good spirits.
For the residents of the Brandywine Valley, the battle took a disastrous toll. The British looted livestock, food, clothes, books, furnishings, and money from many homesteads. The Ring House was especially hard hit, since it served as Washington's quarters before the battle. Both armies ransacked neighboring farms, leaving blight in their wake. It would be nearly 5 years before the community would regain the economic prosperity it enjoyed before the battle. As for the Quakers on September 11th, they simply tried to ignore the horrors waging around them that day. A notation reportedly attributed to a member of the Kennett meeting merely states,
While there was much noise and confusion without, all was quiet and peaceful within.
No further mention of the battle was made.
We will begin our Q&A session for part 2 at this time. And our very first question is, in your opinion, whose fault was it that the Americans lost the Battle of Brandywine?
I mean, there was a lot of factors that went into that. It's a very, I don't think we have enough time in the day to go through all that. But as the video said, one of the first major factors was a poor knowledge of the terrain for Washington. Being in the area for 2 days, he failed to gain the necessary intelligence that he needed of the terrain to, which ultimately led to his main blunder of not guarding those 2 northern forts. The second major factor was the conflicting intelligence that took place on the day of the battle. Throughout the morning, Washington was receiving conflicting intelligence reports that said somebody was out there, somebody wasn't out there, and he didn't know how to react to that. There was a lot of flip-flopping in his decision-making going on. So between those 2 factors, those would be the top 2 reasons.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And a follow-up question to that, did any of the British soldiers remain after the revolution?
Yes, roughly around 5,000 actually stuck around. Those mainly were deserters of the Army throughout the entire 8-year conflict. Um, we also see a lot of Hessian, or those German auxiliary forces, sticking around after and not returning to Germany as well. So you have a large German population, and especially as you head west in Lancaster County, a lot of the Germans actually settled in Pennsylvania, just to the west of Chester County.
Excellent. And I'm going to invite our other panelists in at this time and extend further questions. We'll invite Lynn and Ken and Randall in. And the next question is it true that a Quaker meeting house was actually used as a field hospital during this battle?
Yes, that would be the Birmingham Friends Meeting House. So Washington established this as one of his main hospitals when he arrived in the area. And unfortunately, he thought that he had all of his angles covered and didn't realize that that field hospital would ultimately be in the middle of the heaviest fighting at the Battle of Brandywine. So there are several firsthand accounts that actually give us a good idea of what actually took place during the heaviest fighting. Troops were being rushed out of there and also coming in looking for aid and care. So it was very chaotic, all that was going on.
And what Quaker served as general under Washington at the Battle of Brandywine and in other engagements?
That would be Nathaniel Greene. And that was one of Washington's best generals in my eyes. And Greene was responsible for establishing a rearguard defense that helped Washington's forces retreat out of the area. That brought the British to a grinding halt when they walked right into that rearguard defense.
And I'm going to be asking the following question. Someone who is watching tonight is asking, did Washington learn from Brandywine to have a better knowledge of the areas to which the Army would advance?
Absolutely. Yeah, he did learn a lot of lessons here at Brandywine. And, keep in mind that this is right before Valley Forge. So that's sort of the transformation of Washington's novice ragtag fighting force into a professional fighting force. So not only did he learn the lessons of gaining knowledge and intelligence of the terrain, but also the importance of making sure we have a cohesive fighting force that is on the same playing field and the same level in terms of experience and fighting and training. You have well-trained soldiers fighting with not so well-trained soldiers at Brandywine, and that's where a lot of things start to go wrong, especially in the afternoon.
All four of you are very well versed in the history of the occupation of Kennett Square and also the Brandywine battle. I was wondering what particular story is your very favorite, and we can just go through the entire group. What is your favorite story that you have researched or learned in your studies of either the occupation of Kennett Square or the Battle of the Brandywine?
I think myself, there's so many stories out there because the size and the scale was so large over all the different communities and things like that. And it's one of those things, the more I learn, the more I hear, the more it really makes a change of what this whole area became after the Battle of Brandywine. So I think some of the Quaker perspectives are wonderful. I think some of the local farmers, I know our farm here, Thornbury Farm, was, it went up to a sheriff's sale several years after the battle because the devastation was so great.
Thanks, Randall.
So I like the story of Catherine Bayard, McLean Bayard, that was quoted in the second video. There is a book of her letters back and forth to her son, who was a doctor in the Revolutionary War. Because of her letters, we know of the devastation to the farm where she lived, at Joseph Walter's farm.
Thanks, Lynn.
As Randall said, there's a lot of stories out there that are inspiring and that I'm a fan of, but one guy that doesn't get a lot of credit in this engagement is Casimir Pulaski. He was one of the foreign officers that come over here. This is one of his first major engagements, along with Marquis de Lafayette. And without Casimir Pulaski, Washington's forces would have been completely overrun. As I mentioned, Nathaniel Greene had made that rearguard defense, and General Howe was actually sending troops to outflank that rearguard defense at the end of the day, and Casimir Pulaski noticed this and led a makeshift cavalry charge to the north to repel that. And because of that, he becomes the father, known as the father of American cavalry. He is put in charge of all of Washington's cavalry after this engagement. And to this day, the Army still uses cavalry tactics, just in the form of Humvees and other, mechanized armor that go back to the American Revolution, Casimir Pulaski's doctrine on cavalry. So it's very inspiring even today's world.
Fascinating. Thank you, Andrew. And on behalf of all of us, we sincerely thank you for tuning in to the 2020 Virtual Town Tours and Village Walks series. We have had great fun with this series this summer, and we hope you did too. We also invite you to a brand new monthly virtual heritage series, which will launch on the third Thursday of September, live at 5. And it will be sponsored by the Chester County Historic Preservation Network. In addition, the Chester County Planning Commission is planning a behind-the-scenes webinar series that will focus on historical research, and that will debut on the first Thursday in October. All these programs will be featured for registration on the Chester County Planning Commission's Town Tour and Village Walks webpage. Our special thanks to the Chester County Planning Commission, the Kennett Square and Battle of Brandywine teams, CCHPN, our planning team, and all of you, our viewers, for making this series possible. Tonight's presentation will be uploaded onto YouTube for later viewing. Before we close with a special video entitled Lives Rooted in Places, which was produced by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, we close our Town Tours and Village Walk series by saying goodbye and wishing all of you a safe and healthy and fantastic fall. And now our closing video.
Our stories, our memories, our lives are rooted in places. Some are grand, the stuff of legends. Some are personal, known only to you. Historic places are scattered across our country, in our greatest cities, nestled among corner markets and clothing stores, or out in the fields, on mountains, at the end of dirt roads. Some have been meticulously cared for. Others have been forgotten by all but a few, who are bringing them back to life and help the rest of us to remember. All of these places shape the story of who we are, where we come from, where we're going. They remind us of what we've gone through, honoring our proudest moments and acknowledging the wounds we are still working to heal. Old places inspire us and help us to imagine what comes next. Because these places belong to all of us, we must save them for ourselves, each other, and our future together.